My name is Brenda, and I'm 28 years old. 3 months ago, I thought I knew exactly where I stood in my family. I was wrong. When my parents passed away in that car accident, I expected maybe some jewelry from Mom or Dad's old tools. Instead, I got a crumbling house in the middle of nowhere, Montana, while my brother Marcus inherited their beautiful $2.5 million estate in Denver. My husband David called me weak, pathetic, and told me not to come home until I learned to stand up for myself. So here I am, driving 8 hours to see what my parents really left me. Before I tell you what happened next, let me know where you're watching from and hit that like button if you've ever felt like the forgotten child in your family. Trust me, you'll want to hear how this story ends. The lawyer's office still smelled like stale coffee and disappointment when he read that will 3 weeks ago. I can still hear every word echoing in my head. Marcus Thompson, my older brother by 4 years, would inherit the family home on Cherry Creek Drive in Denver, complete with its marble countertops, 3-car garage, and that stunning view of the mountains I'd admired since childhood. The house where we grew up, where Mom taught me to bake cookies in that gorgeous kitchen, where Dad and I used to sit on the back porch watching thunderstorms roll across the plains. And me, I got a house in Whitefish, Montana, an address I'd never heard of, in a state I'd visited exactly once for a family vacation when I was 12. The lawyer handed me a single key and a piece of paper with coordinates written in Dad's handwriting. No photos, no description, just longitude and latitude, like I was supposed to go on some kind of treasure hunt. Marcus didn't even look surprised. He sat there in his expensive suit, the same navy blue one he wore to client meetings at his financial consulting firm, and nodded like he'd been expecting this exact outcome his entire life. When I glanced over at him with confusion written all over my face, he just shrugged and said, "Mom and Dad always had their reasons, Brenda. I'm sure the Montana property has its charm." Charm, right, because that's exactly what every 28-year-old woman dreams of inheriting. A mysterious property in the middle of nowhere while her brother gets the family mansion worth more than most people make in a lifetime. Growing up, Marcus had always been the golden child. He played varsity football, graduated summa cum laude from University of Colorado, and landed that high-paying job straight out of college. I was the quiet one, the daughter who helped Mom with dinner and listened to Dad's stories about his construction business. I thought that meant something. I thought they saw value in the way I cared for people, the way I remembered everyone's birthdays and called Grandma every Sunday even after she moved to the nursing home. But apparently, love and attention don't translate into inheritance equality. David was furious when I came home with the news. We'd been married for 5 years and money had always been tight. His teaching salary and my part-time work at the local bookstore barely covered our rent, let alone the credit card debt we'd been carrying since his mom got sick last year. We needed that inheritance money. We'd been counting on it to finally get our heads above water, maybe even put a down payment on a house of our own instead of renting that cramped apartment above the pizza shop on Colfax Avenue. "This is unbelievable, Brenda," he said, pacing around our tiny living room like a caged animal. "Your parents just handed your brother a gold mine and gave you what? Some shack in the wilderness, and you're just going to accept it?" I tried to explain that I didn't understand it either, that maybe there was more to the story than we knew. But David wasn't interested in maybes or possibilities. He wanted action, confrontation, the kind of aggressive pursuit of justice that had never been part of my personality. The fight started 3 days later over something as simple as dinner plans. David came home from school in one of his moods, the kind that had been happening more and more frequently since his principal passed him over for the department head position. He slammed his briefcase down on our kitchen counter and looked at me like I was personally responsible for every disappointment in his life. "Did you call that lawyer back about contesting the will?" he asked, not even bothering with hello or how was your day. I was stirring pasta sauce, trying to make something decent out of the generic brand ingredients we could afford. "I told you, David, there's nothing to contest. The will was legal, properly witnessed, everything was done correctly. That's not the point." His voice got that sharp edge that made my stomach clench. "The point is that you're letting your family walk all over you, like you always do. Your brother probably knew about this, probably influenced your parents somehow. You don't know that. I know that you're too scared to find out." He grabbed a beer from the refrigerator and popped it open with more force than necessary. "Your brother knows how to fight for what he wants. He's got that big house, that successful career, probably a healthy bank account. And what do you have, Brenda? A key to some falling-down cabin and a husband who's tired of being married to a doormat." The word hit me like a physical blow. Doormat. That's what he thought of me, what he'd probably been thinking for months or maybe even years. not his partner, not the woman he'd promised to love and support, but an obstacle to the life he thought he deserved. "I'm not a doormat," I said quietly, but even to my own ears it sounded weak. "Really? Because from where I'm standing it looks like you let everyone in your life treat you like one. Your parents, your brother, even me." He took a long drink of beer and stared at me with this cold expression I'd never seen before. "I married a woman, Brenda, not a pushover who's afraid of her own shadow." I turned off the stove and faced him completely. "What do you want me to do, David? Storm into Marcus's house and demand he give me half of everything? Take my dead parents to court? They made their choice, and maybe they had reasons we don't understand." "There you go again." He slammed the beer bottle down so hard I was surprised it didn't shatter. "Making excuses for people who don't deserve them. Your parents screwed you over, and you're standing here defending them like they were doing you some kind of favor." The pasta sauce was starting to burn, but I couldn't bring myself to care. This wasn't really about the inheritance anymore. This was about something deeper, something that had been growing between us like a cancer for longer than either of us wanted to admit. "Maybe they were," I said, surprised by the steadiness in my own voice. "Maybe there's more to this than we can see right now." David laughed, but there was no humor in it. "You know what I think? I think you're scared to find out the truth because you might actually have to do something about it. You might have to stop being the perfect little daughter who never makes waves and start being a woman who fights for herself. And if I don't," he looked me straight in the eye, and I saw our entire marriage crumbling in that single moment, "then don't bother coming home until you do. I can't live with someone who has so little respect for herself that she'll let her own family treat her like garbage." The next morning, I packed a bag. David had already left for work, leaving me a note that said he meant every word he'd said the night before. I stared at that piece of paper for 10 minutes, reading his familiar handwriting and wondering when we'd become strangers living in the same small space. The drive from Denver to Whitefish, Montana took 8 hours and 17 minutes. 8 hours to think about every choice I'd made, every time I'd chosen peace over confrontation, every moment I'd swallowed my pride to keep everyone else comfortable. The Colorado plains gave way to mountains, then forests, then the kind of vast emptiness that makes you feel both terrified and oddly peaceful at the same time. Whitefish, Montana turned out to be one of those towns where everyone waves at passing cars, and the local diner serves coffee that could wake the dead. It was beautiful in a way that Denver, for all its urban sophistication, could never be. The mountains here felt closer, more personal, like they were watching over the valley instead of just providing a scenic backdrop. The GPS led me down increasingly narrow roads until I was driving on what could barely be called a street. Gravel crunched under my tires, and I passed maybe 3 other houses in the span of 2 miles. When I finally reached the coordinates Dad had written down, I sat in my car for a full 5 minutes just staring. The house looked like something out of a horror movie, not because it was particularly frightening, but because it was so obviously abandoned and forgotten. The wood siding had weathered to a dull gray, and ivy covered most of the front porch. Several shutters hung at odd angles, and I could see gaps in the roof where shingles had blown away. The yard was overgrown with weeds and wildflowers that had been left to grow however they pleased. This was my inheritance. This was what my parents thought I deserved. I was about to start the car and drive straight back to Denver when I noticed an elderly woman working in the garden of the house next door. She was maybe 70 years old, wearing a faded floral dress and a wide-brimmed hat that had seen better decades. When she saw me sitting there, she walked over with the kind of confident stride that suggested she wasn't afraid of anything the world might throw at her. "You must be Brenda," she said when I rolled down my window. "I'm Eleanor Patterson, but everyone calls me Mrs. Patterson. I've been waiting for you to show up, waiting for me. Your parents told me you'd come eventually. They said you were the smart one, the one who'd figure things out." She tilted her head and studied me with sharp blue eyes that missed nothing. "Though I have to say, you look a bit more defeated than they expected." I got out of the car because sitting there felt ridiculous. "Did you know my parents well? Well enough to know they weren't the kind of people who did anything without a very good reason?" Mrs. Patterson glanced at the house, then back at me. "Your parents came up here at least once a month for the past 10 years. Always together, always carrying boxes or tools or something that suggested they were working on a project." "A project? Oh yes, that house isn't nearly as empty or broken down as it appears from the outside. Your parents were very careful about maintaining certain appearances." She smiled mysteriously. "The key you're looking for is under the blue flower pot on the back porch. And Brenda, don't judge that house by its exterior. Some of the most valuable things in the world look ordinary on the surface. Mrs. Patterson walked back to her garden before I could ask any follow-up questions, leaving me standing there with more questions than I'd had when I arrived. The back porch was as overgrown as the front, but I found the blue flower pot exactly where she'd said it would be. The key underneath was clean and new, nothing like the rusted piece of metal I'd expected. As I stood there holding that key, looking at the house that was supposedly falling apart, I felt something I hadn't experienced in months: curiosity, real, genuine interest in what I might find behind that weathered front door. For the first time since leaving Denver, I wasn't thinking about David's disappointment, or Marcus's success, or my parents' mysterious decision-making process. I was thinking about what Mrs. Patterson had said about appearances being deceiving, and I was wondering what my parents had been doing up here once a month for 10 years. The key turned smoothly in the lock, which should have been my first clue that things weren't what they seemed. The door opened without the creak I'd been expecting, revealing an interior that made me stop dead in my tracks. The house wasn't falling apart. It wasn't even close to falling apart. The floors were polished hardwood that gleamed in the afternoon sunlight streaming through clean windows. The walls were painted in warm, welcoming colors, and everything was spotlessly clean. Dust covers protected furniture that looked both comfortable and expensive. The kitchen had been updated with modern appliances that were carefully chosen to blend with the rustic aesthetic, and I could see a new refrigerator humming quietly in the corner. This wasn't an abandoned property. This was a well-maintained home that had been staged to look neglected from the outside. I walked through the rooms in a daze, running my fingers along surfaces that should have been covered in dust but weren't. In the master bedroom, I found a note propped against the pillows in my mother's familiar handwriting. "Brenda, if you're reading this, it means you were brave enough to look beyond the surface. Keep looking. Love, Mom. Keep looking." What did that mean? I spent the next hour exploring every room, every closet, every corner of the house. It was beautiful, comfortable, and clearly designed for someone to live in. Not just visit, but actually make a life. The pantry was stocked with non-perishable food. The linen closet held fresh sheets and towels, and there were clothes in the bedroom closet that looked like they'd fit me perfectly. But it was the basement that really caught my attention. Most old houses in Montana don't have basements due to the rocky soil and harsh winters, but this one did. And when I flipped the light switch at the top of the stairs, I realized this wasn't just any basement. The walls were lined with what looked like server equipment, the kind of high-tech setup you might find in a corporate office. Multiple computer monitors sat on a large desk, all connected to towers that hummed with quiet efficiency. There were filing cabinets, a safe that looked like it belonged in a bank, and security monitors that showed various angles of the property. My parents had built some kind of command center in the basement of their supposedly worthless Montana house. I sat down at the desk and stared at the monitors. One showed the front yard where my car was still parked. Another showed the back of the property, revealing a workshop I hadn't noticed from inside the house. A third monitor displayed what looked like live feeds from security cameras positioned around the entire perimeter of the land. This wasn't just a house. This was some kind of secure facility disguised as a rundown cabin. My hands were shaking as I opened the first filing cabinet. Inside were folders labeled with dates going back 15 years, each containing documents that made my head spin. Bank statements showing accounts I'd never heard of, investment portfolios worth more money than I'd ever imagined my parents having, property deeds for land in Montana, Wyoming, and Colorado that added up to thousands of acres. But it was the folder labeled "For Brenda" that made me sit down hard in the desk chair. Inside was a letter in Dad's handwriting that started with the words I'd been waiting my entire life to hear. "Sweetheart, you are exactly the daughter we always hoped you'd be, and this inheritance is proof of how much we trust you." The letter explained everything: the house, the money, the secrecy, and most importantly, why Marcus had been left out of this particular legacy. My parents hadn't been playing favorites. They'd been protecting an empire they'd spent decades building, and they'd chosen me as its guardian because I was the only one they trusted not to destroy it. According to Dad's letter, my parents had started investing in property and stocks back when Marcus and I were still kids. What began as a small side business had grown into something worth nearly $5 million, all of it carefully hidden and managed from this house in Montana. They'd chosen this location specifically because it was remote enough to maintain privacy but close enough to civilization to have reliable internet and phone service. The letter went on to explain why they'd kept this secret from Marcus. My brother, apparently, had gotten himself into serious financial trouble over the past few years. He owed money to the wrong kind of people, had developed a gambling problem that he'd hidden from everyone, and had already approached our parents multiple times asking for loans that he never repaid. "We love your brother," Dad had written, "but we can't trust him with this kind of responsibility. He would see this money as a solution to his problems rather than a legacy to be protected. You, on the other hand, have always understood the difference between needs and wants. You've never asked us for money, never pressured us for anything beyond our love and time. We know you'll use this gift wisely." The safe combination was written at the bottom of the letter along with passwords for the various online accounts and investment portfolios. I opened the safe with hands that wouldn't stop trembling and found more documents, along with nearly $50,000 in cash and a collection of gold coins that had to be worth at least that much again. My parents had left me wealthy, not just comfortable, but genuinely independently wealthy. I was still processing this information when my phone rang. David's name appeared on the screen, and for the first time in our marriage, I didn't feel that familiar flutter of anxiety about disappointing him. "Brenda, where are you? You've been gone for 2 days. I'm in Montana looking at the house." "Good. How much do you think we can get for it? Even if it's just the land value, we could probably pay off the credit cards and maybe have enough left over for a down payment somewhere." I looked around the basement command center, at the monitors showing my secure property, at the bank statements showing more money than David made in 5 years. "I don't think I'm going to sell it." "What do you mean you're not going to sell it? Brenda, we need that money." "No," I said, and the word felt foreign in my mouth. "You need that money. I need to figure out what my parents really wanted me to do with this place." There was silence on the other end of the line. Then David's voice came back harder than before. "Have you lost your mind? You're talking about some falling down shack in the middle of nowhere, like it's a palace. Just sell the thing and come home." "I am home." The words surprised me as much as they seemed to surprise him. "I mean, I think I might be. David, this house isn't what we thought it was. My parents weren't just giving me some worthless property. They were trusting me with something important." "Important? Brenda, you're starting to sound crazy. What could possibly be important about a house you'd never even heard of until 3 weeks ago?" I almost told him about the money, the investments, the hidden empire my parents had built, but something stopped me. Maybe it was the way he'd called me a doormat, or the way he'd thrown me out of our apartment, or the way he was talking to me right now like I was a child who couldn't be trusted to make decisions about my own life. Or maybe it was because I was finally starting to understand what my parents had seen in me that I'd never seen in myself. "I'm going to stay here for a while," I said. "I need to understand what they wanted me to do with this place. Stay there for how long? I don't know. As long as it takes." David's laugh was bitter and familiar. "You can't be serious. You're going to throw away our marriage over some fantasy about your parents' secret intentions?" "I'm not throwing anything away. I'm finally picking something up." I hung up on my husband for the first time in 5 years of marriage, and it felt like the most natural thing in the world. Then I called Marcus. "Brenda, how's the shack treating you?" Even over the phone I could hear the smugness in his voice. The assumption that I was calling to complain about my inheritance, maybe even to beg him for help or money. The old Brenda probably would have done exactly that. "It's interesting," I said. "Much more interesting than I expected. Really, I drove by there once when I was in college, you know. Looked like it was about to fall down even then. I always wondered why Mom and Dad hung on to it." "Did you? Because according to some documents I found, you've been very curious about this place for quite a while." The silence on the other end of the line stretched long enough that I knew I'd hit a nerve. When Marcus finally spoke, his voice had lost its casual confidence. "What kind of documents?" "The kind that show you hired a private investigator last year to research this property. The kind that show you tried to convince Mom and Dad to sell it multiple times. The kind that show exactly why they decided not to include you in certain aspects of their estate planning." "Brenda, I don't know what you think you found, but I found the truth, Marcus. About your gambling debts, about the people you owe money to, about the loans you never paid back. I found Dad's letters about how worried they were about you. And I found Mom's journals documenting every time you asked them for money to solve problems you'd created for yourself." Another long silence. When Marcus spoke again, all pretense was gone. "How much what? How much did they hide up there?" So he'd known. Maybe not the exact amount, maybe not all the details, but he'd known our parents had been keeping something from him. That's why he'd hired the investigator, why he'd been so persistent about the Montana property, why he hadn't seemed surprised when the will was read. "Enough," I said. "More than enough to solve your problems if that's what you're asking. Brenda, you have to understand, I'm in real trouble here. These aren't the kind of people who accept payment plans. I need help and I need it soon. For a moment I felt that familiar tug of sympathy. This was my brother, the person I'd looked up to for most of my life. He was scared, desperate, asking me for help. The old Brenda would have figured out a way to rescue him, would have prioritized his immediate needs over any long-term considerations. But the old Brenda hadn't been trusted with a $5 million inheritance. Then you should have thought about that before you gambled away everything you had, I said. Mom and Dad tried to help you, Marcus. Multiple times. You took their money and you made your problems worse, not better. That's different. That was small amounts, just temporary loans to get me back on my feet. This is serious money, Brenda. This could solve everything. No, I said, and the word felt like stepping off a cliff. This could enable everything. This could make it possible for you to create even bigger problems, hurt even more people, dig yourself an even deeper hole. You don't understand. I understand perfectly. I understand that our parents left me this inheritance because they knew I wouldn't use it to enable destructive behavior, even from someone I love. Marcus was quiet for so long I thought he might have hung up. When he finally spoke, his voice was different. Smaller, more honest than I'd heard it in years. I'm scared, Brenda. I made some really bad choices and now I don't know how to fix them. Then fix them, I said. Get help. Real help, not just money to make the immediate problem go away. Go to counseling, join a support group, file for bankruptcy if you have to. Do the work to actually change your life instead of just looking for someone to bail you out of the consequences. And if I do that, if I actually get help, I looked around the basement command center, at the evidence of my parents' careful planning and long-term thinking. Then we'll talk. But Marcus, the help has to come first. You have to prove you're serious about changing, not just desperate for money. How long do I have? As long as it takes for you to get healthy. This inheritance isn't going anywhere. After I hung up, I sat in that basement for another hour, processing everything that had changed in the span of a single phone call. I'd just told my older brother no, I'd refused to rescue him from problems he'd created. I'd prioritized long-term healing over short-term relief. I'd acted like the kind of person my parents had believed I could be. 3 days later, Marcus showed up at the house with a lawyer in tow. I was sitting on the front porch drinking coffee and watching the sunrise over the mountains when their rental car pulled into the driveway. My brother looked terrible. He'd lost weight, his expensive clothes hung loose on his frame, and there were dark circles under his eyes that suggested he wasn't sleeping well. The lawyer was a thin, nervous man who kept checking his phone and looking around like he expected someone to jump out of the bushes. "Hello, Marcus," I said without getting up from my chair. "Interesting company you're keeping these days. Brenda, we need to talk," I figured. "That's why you drove 8 hours with a lawyer instead of just calling me back." Marcus gestured to his companion. "This is Robert Chen. He specializes in estate disputes. We think there might be grounds to challenge the will based on undue influence or mental incapacity." I took another sip of coffee and studied my brother's face. He looked desperate, but there was something else there too, a kind of calculating desperation that reminded me of a gambler doubling down on a losing hand. Undue influence from whom? Mental incapacity in whom? Mom and Dad were sharp as tacks right up until the accident. Robert Chen stepped forward with a briefcase full of what I assumed were legal documents. "Ms. Thompson, there are questions about your parents' decision-making process in the months before their death. The dramatic difference in inheritances suggests possible coercion or manipulation. By me, by someone with access to your parents during their vulnerable final years." I started laughing. Not the polite, uncomfortable laugh I usually defaulted to in awkward situations, but genuine amusement at the absurdity of what I was hearing. "Marcus, did you tell Mr. Chen about your gambling debts? About the people who are threatening you if you don't pay up? About the multiple loans our parents gave you that you never repaid?" My brother's face flushed red. "That's not relevant to. Did you tell him about the private investigator you hired to research this property? About the fact that you've been trying to get your hands on whatever Mom and Dad were hiding up here for over a year?" Robert Chen looked confused. "Mr. Thompson, you didn't mention any of this information when we discussed your case, because it's not relevant," Marcus said quickly. "Whatever financial difficulties I may have had don't change the fact that our parents' will shows clear signs of manipulation." I stood up and walked to the edge of the porch, looking down at both men. "Mr. Chen, did my brother tell you that I have recordings of him talking to that private investigator about this property? Did he mention that I have copies of email correspondence between him and various lawyers over the past year, all focused on finding ways to access my parents' assets?" The lawyer's expression shifted from confidence to concern. What kind of recordings? The kind that prove Marcus knew our parents had hidden assets, and that he's been trying to figure out how to get his hands on them long before they died. The kind that prove this isn't about injustice or mental incapacity. This is about a gambling addict who needs money to pay off dangerous debts. Marcus stepped toward me with his hands raised. Brenda, you're making this sound worse than it is. Yes, I have some financial problems, but that doesn't mean our parents' decision was fair or reasonable. Actually, it means their decision was exactly fair and reasonable. They knew you'd gamble away anything they gave you. They knew you'd see their life's work as nothing more than a quick fix for problems you created yourself. Robert Chen was packing up his briefcase. Mr. Thompson, I think we need to have a more comprehensive discussion about the facts of this case. Based on what your sister is saying, there may be ethical issues that prevent me from representing you. Wait, Marcus called after the lawyer, but Chen was already walking back to their rental car. This doesn't change anything, Brenda. I still have legal options. No, you don't. I pulled my phone out of my pocket and showed him a recording app that had been running since the moment their car pulled up. You just attempted to commit inheritance fraud in front of a witness while being recorded on property that belongs to me. Any lawyer you hire from now on is going to advise you to drop this immediately and hope I don't decide to press charges. Marcus stared at the phone, then at me, then back at the phone. You recorded our conversation. I recorded you attempting to steal my inheritance through false legal claims. Yes, for the first time since he'd arrived, my brother looked at me like he was seeing a stranger. What happened to you? I grew up. I put the phone back in my pocket and sat down in my chair. I figured out the difference between helping someone and enabling them. I learned to value myself enough to stop letting other people take advantage of my kindness. Marcus sat down heavily on the porch steps, and for a moment he looked less like the successful businessman he'd always pretended to be, and more like the scared little boy I remembered from our childhood. I'm in real trouble, Brenda. These people I owe money to, they're not just going to forget about it if I can't pay. Then you need to talk to the police, not to lawyers, about stealing my inheritance. The police can't protect me from this kind of debt. Maybe not. But running away to Montana with stolen money wasn't going to protect you either. It was just going to give you enough cash to make even bigger mistakes. He looked up at me with tears in his eyes. So what am I supposed to do? What I told you on the phone. Get help. Real help. Check yourself into a treatment program. Work with a financial counselor. Figure out how to rebuild your life instead of just looking for ways to escape the consequences of your choices. And if I do that, I thought about my parents' letter, about their love for both of their children, and their desperate desire to help Marcus without enabling his self-destruction. If you do that, if you actually commit to changing your life, then we'll figure out how I can help you. But the help comes after the change, not before. And it won't be enough money to gamble away your problems. It'll be enough support to build something better. Marcus wiped his eyes with the back of his hand. How do I know you'll follow through? Because Mom and Dad trusted me to make the right choices. And the right choice is helping you get healthy, not helping you stay sick. He sat there for another 10 minutes, staring out at the mountains and thinking about whatever people think about when their entire world has just shifted beneath their feet. Finally, he stood up and started walking toward the rental car. Marcus, I called after him. I meant what I said. Get help and I'll be here. He nodded without turning around, and I watched him drive away with a mixture of sadness and relief. For the first time in my life, I'd chosen long-term love over short-term rescue. I'd refused to enable someone I cared about, even when it would have been easier to just give him what he wanted. I'd acted like the woman my parents had raised me to be, not the doormat everyone else expected me to remain. 6 months later, I was sitting in the same chair on the same porch when David's car pulled into the driveway. I'd been expecting this visit ever since I'd officially filed for divorce 3 weeks earlier, but seeing him get out of his familiar Honda still made my heart skip a beat. He looked good. Thinner, maybe a little tired, but good. He was wearing a shirt I'd bought him for his birthday 2 years ago, and his hair was cut the way I'd always liked it. For just a moment I felt that old flutter of attraction, that familiar urge to smooth things over and pretend our problems weren't as serious as they'd seemed. Then I remembered who I'd become over the past 6 months, and the feeling passed. Hello, David. Brenda. He walked up to the porch but didn't sit down. You look different. I probably did. Living in Montana had given me a tan I'd never had in Denver, and the physical work of managing the property had left me stronger and more confident than I'd been in years. But the real change was deeper than that. I feel different. I got the divorce papers. I figured you would. He shifted his weight from one foot to the other. a nervous habit I'd learned to recognize over 5 years of marriage. Is this really what you want? It's what I need. Because of the money, because you inherited more than we thought. I'd been wondering when he'd figure that part out. David was many things, but he wasn't stupid. A woman doesn't walk away from her marriage to live alone in Montana unless something significant has changed about her circumstances. The money is part of it, I said honestly. But it's not the most important part. Then what is? Self-respect. The ability to look at myself in the mirror and see someone worth loving. The confidence to believe that I deserve better than being called a doormat by the person who's supposed to love me most. David's face flushed, and I could see him remembering that fight, remembering the words he'd thrown at me in anger and frustration. I was upset. I didn't mean it the way it sounded. Yes, you did. And you know what? You were right. I was a doormat. I let everyone in my life walk all over me because I thought that was what love looked like. I thought taking care of other people meant sacrificing myself. And now I know the difference between caring for someone and enabling them. I know the difference between being kind and being weak. I know that real love requires boundaries, and I'm finally strong enough to enforce them. David sat down on the porch steps without being invited, and I could see him looking around at the property that had become my home. The house that had looked so run down from the outside was now clearly well maintained. The yard was landscaped, the driveway was paved, and there were obvious signs of the security system my parents had installed. Marcus told me about the money, he said quietly. About what your parents really left you. Did he tell you about the conditions I put on helping him? Treatment first, then support. Smart. I thought so. David looked up at me with an expression I'd seen 1,000 times during our marriage, but which felt different now that I understood what it really meant. I came here to ask you to come home, to ask if we could work things out, and now I'm wondering if I ever really knew you at all. I considered that for a moment, watching a hawk circle over the valley below us. You knew the woman I used to be, the woman who was so afraid of being abandoned that she'd accept any treatment, any criticism, any dismissal, as long as it meant people would stay. And who are you now? Someone who understands that being alone is better than being with people who don't value what I bring to their lives. Someone who knows that real love doesn't require me to make myself smaller to make other people feel bigger. David nodded slowly, and I could see him processing the end of our marriage in real time. I wasn't a very good husband, was I? You were the husband you knew how to be. Married to the wife I knew how to be. Neither of us was particularly good at it. Do you think we could learn, if we tried again? The question hung in the air between us, and I found myself really considering it for the first time since I'd left Denver. David wasn't a bad man. He'd been frustrated, disappointed, struggling with his own sense of failure and inadequacy. Under different circumstances, with different versions of ourselves, maybe we could have made it work, but I wasn't interested in different circumstances or different versions. I was interested in building a life with the person I'd become, not trying to resurrect something with the person I used to be. I don't think so, I said gently. I think we both need to find people who love us as we are now, not as we were when we didn't know any better. David stood up and walked back toward his car, then stopped and turned around. Are you happy, Brenda? Really happy? I looked around at my property, at the mountains that had become my daily view, at the life I'd built from the foundation my parents had provided. I'm content. I'm proud of myself. I'm excited about the future. I think that might be better than happy. I'm glad, he said, and I could tell he meant it. You deserve that. After he drove away, I sat on my porch until the sun went down, thinking about all the ways my life had changed since that day in the lawyer's office. Marcus was 3 months into a treatment program in Colorado, doing the hard work of understanding his addiction and learning to build a life that didn't revolve around gambling. We talked once a week, and for the first time in years, our conversations felt honest and real. I'd used some of my inheritance to start a small business providing financial consulting services to other small business owners in the area. It turned out that watching my parents build an empire had taught me more about investing and money management than I'd realized. I was good at it, and more importantly, I enjoyed it. But the biggest change was internal. I'd learned to trust my own judgment, to value my own opinions, to see myself as someone worth defending and protecting. I'd learned that being strong didn't mean being harsh, and that being kind didn't require being weak. My parents had left me more than money or property. They'd left me the foundation to become the woman they'd always believed I could be. And for the first time in my life, I believed it too. What started as the worst betrayal of my life had turned into the greatest gift I'd ever received, not because of the money, but because of what earning that trust had taught me about my own worth. Sometimes the people who love us most give us exactly what we need, even when it doesn't look like what we wanted. Sometimes the inheritance that matters most isn't what's written in the will, but what we discover about ourselves when we're brave enough to look beyond appearances and dig deeper into the truth. I thought my parents had left me the scraps while my brother got the feast, but they'd actually left me the tools to build my own empire, and the wisdom to know the difference between what looks valuable and what actually is. Now, I want to hear from you. Have you ever discovered that something you thought was worthless turned out to be exactly what you needed? Have you found strength you didn't know you had when life forced you to stand up for yourself? Drop a comment below and share your story, because I believe we all have moments when we discover we're stronger than we thought. If this story resonated with you, please hit that like button and subscribe for more stories about finding strength in unexpected places. Share this with someone who might need to hear that sometimes what looks like the worst thing that could happen is actually the beginning of the best thing that could happen. Thank you for listening, and remember that your worth isn't determined by how others treat you, but by how you choose to treat yourself.